What's up, everybody? Welcome to the newest edition of Metal Sanctuary. Been a while since I did a video with my bright shining face on it, and as you may have been able to tell, the whole 30 people who watch these videos, yes, my beard is a little bit shorter. Trimmed it for a job interview. Hopefully, and then I start growing it back long again. First things first. Need to say a quick rest in peace to Vinnie Paul of Pantera and Hell Yeah. Um, he died in his sleep a few nights ago, apparently of a heart attack. He was 54 years old. Um, this isn't the subject matter for this video, so I'm gonna make it kind of quick on this. So I started probably first listening to Pantera when I was in about 11th grade. Somebody made me a copy of the Demon Knight soundtrack, which had Cemetery Gates on it. And then from there, watched a couple of videos on MTV. I think Broken and 5 Minutes Alone were on there. And it really wasn't until I started being able to buy music on my own when I bought Cowboys from Hell, and then ultimately Vulgar Display of Power, I really started getting heavily into Pantera. And it's just a huge loss for the metal community. To his family, obviously, we just hope for them to. You never get over something like this, but definitely hope that they can pull it together and just push through this tragic event that's happened. So, back with another top 10. This time we're doing the top 10 metal albums released in 1990. Now, the 90s in general, you had grunge, you had alternative and stuff like that, and it was really pushing mainstream metal, not just the glam bands, but the thrash bands and the Judas Priests and the Iron Maidens and the Dios of the world, starting to kind of push them further away from media exposure and bringing in bands like Nirvana, Stone Temple Pilots, and the like. Now, the years 87 to 89, those 3 years were really strong years for metal. Really hard to make a top 10 out of those in those years. The 90s in general, we'll see how they go, but the year 1990 was pretty tough. And Buddy and I were talking about this one day last week, and we were talking about just how many game-changing albums, how many debuts, how many great bands. Maybe not necessarily their debuts, but maybe kind of more the record that came out and got them into the public. Just a lot of great records that came out in that year. I won't be able to list them all because I'm not going to remember everything. And to be honest, I got kind of lazy writing down albums because one, I was getting carpal tunnel, and two, I was only going to have 10, so I had to narrow. I had to have a small list to narrow it down to 10, which I didn't. I had ended up with 17 to narrow it down to 10. So just to get some of the honorable mentions out there, Pantera, Cowboys from Hell, as one of them, to me, I considered to be a game changer. That really started showing um, later on, even with that record, but especially with Vulgar and Far Beyond Driven, to be even heavier and more abrasive metal could go further. So Queensryche, Empire, Cannibal Corpse debut, Eaten Back to Life, King Diamond, The Eye, which is one of the weaker King Diamond albums, but still a pretty good album. You had Suicidal Tendencies with Lights, Camera, Revolution was a really good record that came out that year. Prong, Beg to Differ, always loved Prong. They've had records that came out before this, but this was kind of like the real start of kind of like their transition to being like a groove metal band. And those are just some of the ones that ended up being an honorable mention category. So let's delay no further and get into the top 10. At number 10, Slayer, Seasons in the Abyss. I picked this record because to me it's got the perfect combination of the last two Slayer records before it, Rain in Blood and South of Heaven. It's got some really, kind of faster, thrashier songs like War Ensemble, Born of Fire, Then you have the more kind of groovy oriented stuff that would have maybe come off South of Heaven, something like Skeletons of Society or Expendable Youth, something like that. At number 9, gonna get a debut in there. Entombed, Left Hand Path, Swedish death metal pioneers. I kind of consider them more like the beginning of the death and roll because the vocals weren't really pure death metal, but still a very good record. At number 8, and this is how good I think that this list is, that I put this at number 8, Megadeth in Peace. I could have put a little bit higher, but for me, the song Dawn Patrol was like the one that just I can't seem to get past that. Where I have them ranked in the where I have that album ranked for Megadeth in general. At number, not one of my favorite records, but I think it really stands the test of time. No pun intended. Anthrax, Persistence of Time. At number 6, Death, Spiritual Healing. This is where it really becomes the progressive version of Death. The couple records before that are dealing mainly with just a strict death metal um, outtake, but this record just kind of it started their progressive approach to the music writing and the lyrics as well. At number 5, Iron Maiden, No Prayer for the Dying. Now, this was an album that I almost didn't even put in the top 10. And I started looking and I was like, I really thought about it hard and I was like, I really do like this album. It wasn't something that I put in my top 5 of Maiden, but it is still a really good, strong album. And then I started looking at the albums. I kind of started doing this one backwards. I started it with the top one, and then after that, that was like the no brainer. And the rest of it I kind of built up, and I was like, okay, well, No Prayer is better than all these records, but it's not better than the four that's going to come before it. Still a very strong effort. Really wouldn't find a year yet anyway where Maiden wouldn't be in the top 10, even at least even in the top 5. At number 4, a sophomore effort, going back to the death metal scene. We go to Obituary with Cause of Death. This is probably like my second or third favorite Obituary record. So it's of no surprise to me that I would put it up that high. At number 3, we go back to the thrash roots and Exodus. Impact is Imminent. Definitely just a great thrashy record. Always love Zetro's vocals. I think any Exodus album would make the top 10. Band I really haven't mentioned much because they only had one other album prior to this in the early years. A band, Sanctuary, out of Seattle, their sophomore album, Into the Mirror Black. It's a different than their first album, a lot more progressive, a lot more kind of thought provoking when as a listener listening to the way the songs go. This is it's a very underrated album, I think, too. Not just the band itself. Obviously, they predate eventually Nevermore, and I like Nevermore slightly more than I like Sanctuary, but there's really just not that much of a sample size from Sanctuary to really get into that kind of a debate between the two bands. But this is a really good album, and one that if you have never checked out, you really need to check out. Check out both of their albums. They have another record that came out in 2014, I think. Um, and just check out the band in general. And I think that album in particular, I think you'll see why I knocked it all the way up to number 2. And last but not least, the number 1 album for the year 1990, in my humble opinion, Painkiller by Judas Priest. Buddy and I did a video some months ago where we were talking about the top 5 most metal albums, and the one that we agreed on being most metal and being the top 1 was Painkiller, Judas Priest. There's no filler on this record. Maybe Battle Hymn, the little slight instrumental there towards the end, but that's just kind of a lead on, so I really wouldn't consider that a song. I just don't think there's not an album to me that stands up to it from this year. or for that year that it came out, I don't. There's no. It's a flawless record, in my opinion. Um, and I think that there's quite a few other albums obviously out there because I haven't listened to every album ever made, and nobody even who was even alive and listening to the very first Black Sabbath records ever to find me for the one that you have higher than Painkiller and the one that you would put number one. I haven't listened to it yet. So there we go. There's my top 10 with Judas Priest being number one for the year 1990. Until we meet again, stay metal and God bless.